In John the 13th chapter, we open up that chapter understanding that it is the Lord's hour. His hour has come. That's very important, because throughout the book of John, his hour was not yet come when he was at the wedding in John the 2nd chapter, as he told his mother. And there were times when he would get out of the way of trouble because his hour was not yet. It had not come. But John the 13th chapter says his hour is here. And it was before the feast of the Passover, Jesus, knowing that his hour was come, that he should depart out of this world unto the Father. And it is during this time that we find that he instructs his apostles, those close to him, in ways that they should live their life and how they should conduct themselves after he's gone. And this evening, I would like to investigate those lessons. I think it's important. He's about ready to leave this earth, and there becomes something of importance. What do you say when it is your hour to depart this world? And it's kind of like being on an airplane where they tell you that if we lose oxygen and you parents are there, you make sure you got your place secure before you help your babies. And a lot of times I would panic and want to help them and mess it all up. But you got to take care of yourself. Jesus has everything in order for himself. Look at this. Verse 3, knowing that the Father had given him all things unto his hands, and that he came forth from God and goeth unto God. He knows where he's come from. He knows where he's going. He knows that even though he's about ready to be in the hands of a government that wants to crucify him, everything's in his hands. He knows he came from the Father, and that's where he's going. And knowing that, he says, I'm getting ready to instruct my apostles. Rising from supper and laying aside his garments, he took a towel and girded himself. And he poureth water into the basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel wherewith he was girded. He's got his ducks in order. He knows everything. He knows Judas is about to betray him. He knows what is going to take place. What do I need to do at this my last hour? My hour has come. What do my apostles need to know? And what did they do? He began to wash their feet. He girded himself with a towel, used that towel as he's going to wash their feet. Now, I want us to look that though he's doing that, some of the things he says in verse 7, for example, Jesus answered and said to them, what I'll do, thou knowest not now, but thou shalt understand hereafter. Jesus, you're washing my feet. Yeah, we know what you're doing. That happens all the time in our society. That's what you're doing. No, you don't. No, you don't get it. And that tells me he's talking more than just speaking about feet washing. He's using that as a very vivid example of what he is driving at, and you'll understand it later. You don't know it now. We continue, verse 12. So when he had washed their feet and taken his garments and sat down again, he said to them, know ye what I have done to you? I could see Peter say, yeah, you washed my feet. I didn't like it. I didn't want it. You made me do it. Maybe submit to your feet washing. And do you know what I've done to you? It's deeper than just the action of washing feet. He's driving. I want to teach them something. Know ye what I've done to you? Verse 15. I've given you an example that ye should also that ye also should do as I have done unto you. Well, Jesus, you're washing my feet, and you said we don't know what you're doing yet. What I have done to you, you do it unto each other. And yes, he wanted them to wash their feet. But he's driving at the point, what he's trying to teach them, that they'll understand later And what he's driving at is something else. It wasn't just the idea of feet washing. That's how you are in that society. That's how you are expressing what he really wants us to take from this learning lesson in his last hour. And what was it? You humble yourself to serve others. Notice in verse 13, as he's getting to his point, you call me teacher and Lord. And you say, well, for so I am. If I then, the Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash another's feet. And the point is, it's not, well, we're feet washing, it's who's doing it. And you'll notice that Peter had reacted about who's doing it. That was very important. You drop back up with me to verse 6. He cometh to Simon Peter and said to him, Lord, dost thou wash my feet? Jesus answered and said to him, what I do thou knowest not now, but thou shalt understand hereafter. And he said unto him, thou shalt never wash my feet. Why? Because that's what a servant does. And Jesus, you're my teacher. You're my Lord. That's what a servant does. But you're Lord. You're not going to wash my feet. Jesus says, if I don't, you'll have no part in me. See, he's driving home this lesson of humility and service. And Peter understands that because he's rebelling against, you're not going to wash my feet. And Jesus uses this example also that when you wash feet, he said, Peter then reacts as he always does, just wash me all over. Well, those who take a bath, they don't need to be cleansed again, but they need to have their feet washed, even between baths. If you get a bath every Saturday night, maybe your feet need to be washed Tuesday and Thursdays. But not all the time. But he said, not everybody's clean. He's pointing out Judas. That's on his mind. But it was idea that, oh, he's a Lord. He's teacher. He's not going to wash my feet. And that's indeed what he's driving home. And in verse 16, verily, verily, I say unto you, a servant is not greater than his Lord. Neither one that is sent greater than he that sent me. If you know these things, blessed are ye if you do them. In that culture, in that time, when they're walking around with open shoes, sandals, between baths, that was something that was part of their hospitality. That's how they expressed their hospitality. Remember in 1 Timothy, how the woman has shown her good works, that she's washed the saints' feet. But Jesus is not instituting another facet of our worship service. You're not saying you have to wash feet in 2014. Because he's driving home something that they knew in their culture that was reserved for a servant, and their teacher just did it. And he's teaching the humility to serve others. He's teacher and Lord, but he's our servant when he washed our feet. He said, I think that's what Jesus is driving at for us to take home. Because Peter, down the road, by inspiration, he's not any longer talking about feet washing, but he's broadening that. He got it. He understood later. And in 1 Peter 5 and verse 5, we read likewise, ye younger be subject unto the elder, yea, all of you, I don't care what age you are, yea, all of you gird yourself with humility. How can you miss Peter thinking about what happened that hour that Jesus was his life, what he taught me back then? You gird yourself, humility. He laid aside his garments, girded himself with a towel, just like a slave does, to wash their feet. But he's Lord. He lowered himself with humility to serve. Humble yourselves and in humility to serve one another. For God resisteth the proud, but giveth grace to the humble. Paul, wants us to have that attitude. Peter doesn't talk about feet washing. Paul doesn't talk about washing feet, but the principle that they got, that was taught those apostles at that time, they catch it and they drive it home to the Christians. Philippians 2 and verse 3 and 4, doing nothing through action or through vain glory, but in lowliness of mind, each counting other better than himself. Now looking of each to his own things, but each of you also to the things of others. I will serve you, meet your needs. Your feet are dirty, they need washing, we'll wash them. House needs cleaning. That difficult chore that maybe only a servant can do, and I rack my mind, how can I apply that today? Comparatively, we have clean feet. No, some of us do. But what do we get to do that? and I thought about the times I remember having a job that no one else wanted in downtown Dallas, and it was cleaning the latrines in a labor place where all the common laborers were. And there was a man that had that job, and that was one of my first jobs. And that pine saw is still in my memory. We soaked the place with pine saw, and it smelled good. We took pride in our job. But that's not something, as I walked around thinking, well, they must think I'm pretty high class. I knew what they thought. And they could get those places just as dirty as you can imagine. But would the boss man do that job? Would the superintendent of that whole operation do that job? My granddaddy was a superintendent. He never did it. He never did it. But Jesus would. That's what he's driving home. And when we think about our life as Christians in a congregation, we have elders and deacons, and we have the preacher, and there may be this leadership role. Jesus is teaching us that we need to humble ourselves to meet the needs of others. Whether we're an elder, deacon, evangelist, minister, that's the heart of a servant. And that helps leadership. That helps deacons in their service. That helps preachers in their work. And it's not the idea where I look down upon some other person. I humble myself to think about where they're coming from. I need to consider their things, not just my own things. And I'm not so high that I don't live so low to do service unto others. And whether I do not wash feet the rest of my life, that's how I need to serve my brethren in 2014 and beyond. And that's what Jesus is teaching. He knew where he's going. Everything's been given in his hand. He knew he came from God. He said, I need to teach them this before I go. And he did that at hour. And Peter would later say, gird yourself in humility to serve one another. The reason we don't serve one another sometimes is that we haven't done the first part. I'm not even going to humble myself to even think about what they're going through, to even think about what need they have. Then secondly, I'm not going to do that. Someone else will do that. No, we'll do that. If you call me Lord and teacher, and I am here in this form of a servant washing your feet, then you need to do likewise to your brethren. The second lesson, and it comes at the end of this wonderful chapter, the beginning of that night when Jesus is with his apostles. He says, a new commandment give I unto thee. He's talking about where I'm going, you can't go. And you'll notice that right when he gets through saying this, it says, ye shall seek me, in verse 33, and as I said unto the Jews, whether I go, you cannot come. So I say unto you, so now I say unto you. Then he says, a new commandment I give unto you. And it's just kind of an abrupt thing. I need to get this over too. I got the humility to serve part in there. But Judas has gone out. As we saw this morning, the Son of Man is glorified. And I need to tell them that Peter, you can't go where I'm going now. And those are things that need to go, but I need to get across the new commandment. And what is it? A new commandment I give unto you, that you love one another. How, Lord? Even as I have loved you, that you also love one another. I don't believe he's saying here that you love one another because I loved you. You love one another as I have loved you. It's because I loved you, then you love one another. He's given us the pattern to follow. You love one another even as I have loved you. In that manner, you also love one another. I've loved you. You love one another. How, Lord? In the way I've loved you. That's what makes it a new commandment. Loving one another is not new. But loving one another as Christ loved us. He said that's new commandment. And I want us to look at it in three ways. His love was self-sacrificial. I'm sure we've seen the pictures and illustrations, and I've seen it over and over again, where, God, how much do you love me? And his hands are stretched out on the cross. I love you that much. And that's kind of a vivid. I love you that much to stretch my hands on a cross and die for you. I love you that much. No one took his life from him. I lay it down myself. And I'm also going to take it up again. But I lay it down on myself. No one forced me. No one's taken my life. They crucified you, Jesus. That's what they're about to do. This is your last night. Tomorrow morning, you'll be dead. But I am offering myself as the Lamb of God. He already knows all that's going to take place. How did he love? Sacrifice. And his sacrifice was the ultimate one. He gave his own life. He died so we could live. Paul speaks about the character of love. I think he brings out this point and the wonderful characteristics of what true love is. It's long-suffering, it's kind, it envieth not, it vaunteth not itself. There's that humility and how we react to other people. It's not puffed up. It doesn't behave itself unseemly. Verse 5, seeketh not its own. It's not selfish. It is self-sacrificial. It's the type of love that a husband has for his wife. As Jesus loved the church, you're to love your wife, even as. Well, how did he love the church? He gave himself up for it. It's self-sacrificial. And that's the love. What does it cost you? Cost you time? Cost you money? Cost you effort? Put you behind your schedule? What are you willing to sacrifice for the well-being of another? See, when we start with the first lesson, have the humility to serve, then my time, my money, my efforts, is secondary. What do you need? And love says, I'll meet it. I will seek your well-being. That's what Jesus did. It took his death for us to live. He went the nth degree with that. And that's kind of the way we ought to love one another. Secondly, it is active goodwill toward enemies. That tells me that it's not always reacting. I will love you if first you love me. 1 John 4 verse 10, here is love. Not that we love God, but they loved us and sent his son to be the propitiation for our sins. Not that we loved him, but he loved us first. He wasn't reacting to how well we treated him. So, well, I love you. I will love those who first love me. No, it is active toward your enemies. They don't do anything that's good toward you, but I'm to love them. That's how Jesus loved. Romans the 5th chapter, in verse 8, God commendeth his own love toward us, that while we were what? We were sinners. While we were sinners, in that state of disobeying his law, in that state of not living according to righteousness, his standard, disregarding how he would want us to live. While we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. Well, what's involved with that? Look at verse 10. If while we were enemies, we were reconciled to God through the death of his Son, there's his self-sacrifice. Much more being reconciled shall we be saved by his life. For if while we were enemies, Christ died for us. Died for us when we were sinners. That's how Jesus loved. And therefore we are to translate that into our life, where we are actively seeking the goodwill of everybody, regardless what they do to us. That's hard, difficult. But when we come with humility to serve, this is the type of love that motivates us. And that's in the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus is driving this home as the character of God. I say unto you, love your enemies and pray for them that persecute you. Don't pray, God, how can I get even? Pray for their well-being, that ye may be sons of your Father who is in heaven. He maketh his sun to rise on the evil and the good. He sendeth his rain on the just and the unjust. Look what he does. He just steady gives good to people, regardless of what they do back to him. You love one another even as I have loved you. And at one time we were all enemies of God. We'd all have fallen short of his glory. And yet here was this love that he gave his only begotten Son so that we wouldn't have to perish. It is active goodwill. That's the type of love we have. So regardless of who that person is, maybe in a congregation, personalities aren't exactly the way I like. Or they may be someone that is their enemy. God forbid that would happen in a local congregation. But things can get cross and they've done me wrong. It doesn't change anything. You love them. He said, that's the way I want you to live. And it's so important with the Lord. This is his hour of departing. I want to drive that home. Therefore, we should take it home tonight. And then the final point is that it is continuous. You don't stop loving. Sometimes I haven't thought a lot about that. You know, I keep loving, but it's the way it's got to be. How did Jesus love? John 13 and verse 1, knowing that it was his hour, he should go, leave this world, and go on the Father. Having loved his own that were in the world, he loved them unto the end. Even Judas. Even Judas. Now there's an enemy. He eats bread with all of us. And he goes out and will betray me. Scripture will be fulfilled. Jesus knows that. But he loved them. Why does it say even unto the end? Because he did not stop loving. But there's something very interesting in the midst of Judas betraying him, going to betray him. And it's verse 21. When Jesus had said thus, he was troubled in the spirit and testified and said, verily, verily, I say unto you, one of you shall betray me. This wasn't an easy time for Jesus. He was troubled in his spirit. Now here's the teacher. He's troubled, and yet in John 14 and verse 1, he says, let not your heart be troubled. Preach. Not, you're troubled. You want you to practice what you preach, Jesus. You're troubled, you tell me not to be troubled. But Jesus never sinned. But he didn't want his people to sin. He didn't want his disciples to be troubled. This word trouble is not a calm word. Remember in John 5 and verse 7, when that man who had been in infirmity for 38 years, and he was waiting for the pool to be troubled? Now, I think you have a concept what that might mean. That pool is agitated. It's boiling, it's rolling. That's Jesus' spirit. He's agitated. Yet he's not sinning. He doesn't want us, his apostles, and this to be troubled. What's the difference? I know Jesus is not sinning. What would be something that we're lacking if our heart is troubled? John 14 and verse 1, let not your heart be troubled. What is the anecdote? Believe in God. Believe also in me. My Father's house so many mansions, if we're not, so I would have told you, I go to prepare a place for you. That here is the remedy for me being troubled in a way that God doesn't want me to be troubled. I need to have faith. I need to believe. So I'll take care of that one. Jesus, why are you troubled? Because I love. That's why. I'm agitated. And he's thinking of Judas. You think about what Judas done. Ate bread at the table, my familiar friend. Judas, you've been with me for 3 years. You've seen me do miracles. You've done miracles. And you've heard my teaching. And yet you're about to go out and destroy yourself. Destruction. He loved Judas. And it agitated him. It troubled him. That's a good love. And when people disappoint us, when people ruin their lives, when people, that doesn't make us happy. We can be agitated because we love to the end. We don't quit loving. Where we find that we quit loving. Well, they're my friend, now they're my enemy. I still love them, don't I? I love my enemies. Love, seeking the well-being, it may take a different course than we've been going. And what was Jesus now going to do? He just can't harbor that. I'm agitated because I love. What does he have to do? He's going to have to bring forth the faith that he has in God and realize not everyone's going to be saved. Because we have to move on too, even when people destroy themselves. But love is always seeking their well-being. And brethren, that's when you become an asset to people's lives. You don't ever quit loving. You tell them what they need to know, but you're not happy with it, and they need to know that. He was troubled in his spirit. But he loved Judas to the end. He also loved Peter. Well, Peter, he's not going to betray him. He'll deny him. And I want you to think about just the way the text reads. When Jesus has talked about in verse 33, little children, yet a little while I'm with you. You shall seek me. And as I said unto the Jews, whither I go, ye cannot come. So now I say unto you, a new commandment I give unto you. Jesus is now to the new commandment. And Peter's not there. This is so important to love one another. What does he say in verse 36? Simon Peter said to him, Lord, whither goest thou? Jesus answered, whither I go, thou canst not follow now, but thou shalt follow afterwards. And Peter said, Lord, why cannot I follow thee now? Have you ever tried to get across something to maybe children and they're thinking about something else that happened right before that and they're not over it? That's what Peter's doing. Peter, didn't you get the point? Love one another. Yeah, I got that, but where are you going? I want to go. And I'm determined to go. And I will even die for you. Jesus said, really? Cock shall not crow till thou hast denied me thrice, Peter. Jesus just has to love Peter the way he is, because that's the way he is. He didn't know what's about ahead of him. And he's going to hit bottom too. He's going to be weeping bitterly when he sees the silent look of Jesus in just a few hours. But Jesus is patient. He tells him, you can't come now, but you'll go later. Because as we saw this morning, he's going to prepare a place for even Peter. But it's continuous. He never gets frustrated to quit loving. He gets agitated because he loves. And Judas and Peter are a great test of what that kind of love is. And that's the way we ought to love. We should never sew up because it didn't go our way. We should never kind of get detached and get depressed because they're out here going to continue to destroy themselves and I was there to help them. They didn't follow my suggestions. You don't quit loving. You might be there when no one else is there to pick up the pieces. You love to the end. Jesus says, as I have loved you, and Judas and Peter, your immediate application of it, you love one another. And when we do that, we have taken home the two lessons. And I hope you'll take it home and put it in your life. Of following Jesus in his hour. Those were the two lessons he wanted his apostles to know and to apply in their lives. And I think we need it yet today. We might not be washing feet as they did then. It's not something reserved for just a servant. But we realize, no, I'm going to take the lesson as Jesus says, you'll understand after. I'm your teacher, I am your Lord, and I just washed your feet. Humble yourself, gird yourself with humility, Peter says, to serve one another. I believe so I want to be a servant. I want to serve other people, but you never get the first point. You never humble yourself to do that. Do that first. And then you'll find yourself, I can do that work. What do you need? I don't care what it is. We'll do it. And you serve. And that will be a blessing to people. And then you love one another as Jesus loved. And as I close with verse 35, he says, by this kind of love, shall all men know that ye are my disciples, if you have love one to another. Now that's following in the steps of Jesus. That's discipleship. That is a sign that we're truly following Jesus, that we love him self-sacrificially, that we're going to be loving them continuously. We're going to continue to love them. And we're not going to ever stop. And I hope we'll be that type of people. When you have each person in a congregation living this out in their life, you're going to have a loving group. You're going to have a serving group. You're going to have a humble group that gets it done and does it with joy because we are looking like Jesus and loving as he should. So allow people to help you. If you have a need, let someone know. Let elders know so they can be a servant unto you. And we will be a people that are close together and loving as we should. Tonight, if you're not a child of God, we encourage you to become a Christian. God loved us so much that he gave his only begotten Son, willing to sacrifice his Son. And Jesus was willing to give his life so that we could live. He paid the penalty of sin. He died for us. so that we can be free from sin and from the guilt of sin and can serve God according to a standard of righteousness that we see in the gospel. And if you haven't started walking that road, following Jesus, following his steps, being a Christian, we encourage you to do so. Having your sins washed away, you can live God with a clear conscience and you can serve him. You've got the pattern. You'll never regret it. You'll never find yourself not having anything to do. And you'll be a blessing to other people. Why not live a life of service, following Jesus? Hope you'll come now as we stand and as we sing.